The security alert on my phone buzzed at exactly 2:47 p.m. on a Tuesday afternoon. I was sitting in a budget meeting at work when I saw the notification. Motion detected in garage. Live feed available. My blood went cold as I opened the app and watched two figures inside my detached garage, hunched over my steel safe with crowbars and bolt cutters. One of them was Corinne Morrison, my HOA president neighbor who had been harassing me for months about my property. The other was someone I recognized from the neighborhood meetings. They were not just snooping around anymore. They were actively trying to break into my safe. I watched in horror as Corinne positioned what looked like a small drill against the lock mechanism. My hands shook as I grabbed my keys and ran for the parking lot. I called 911 while speeding toward my ranch property, but I knew they would be gone before anyone arrived. What Corinne did not know was that my safe did not contain what she thought it contained. Inside that steel box were not personal valuables or cash or anything a suburban HOA president might expect to find. Inside were classified FBI case files, evidence bags, and sensitive documents related to an ongoing federal investigation. Corinne Morrison had just made the biggest mistake of her life. She was about to learn that some safes should never be opened. 6 months earlier, I had finally found my perfect escape from the chaos of city life. The ranch property sat on 5 acres of rolling hills just outside town, far enough from the urban noise to feel peaceful, but close enough to make my commute manageable. The main house was a modest single-story structure with large windows that overlooked open fields. The detached garage was spacious enough for my truck and had plenty of room for storage. I remember the first morning I woke up in my new home. The silence was incredible. No traffic, no sirens, no neighbors arguing through thin apartment walls. Just the sound of wind through the trees and birds singing in the distance. I stood on my front porch with my coffee and thought I had finally found my sanctuary. That illusion lasted exactly 3 days. Corinne Morrison appeared at my front door on a Thursday morning, carrying a clipboard and wearing the kind of forced smile that immediately puts you on guard. She was a woman in her early 50s with perfectly styled blonde hair and clothing that looked like it came straight from a suburban magazine spread. "Welcome to Meadowbrook Estates," she announced, extending her hand. "I am Corinne Morrison, president of our homeowners association. I wanted to personally welcome you to our community and discuss some important neighborhood guidelines." I shook her hand and invited her inside, thinking this was just a friendly neighbor introduction. Corinne stepped into my living room and immediately began scanning the space with sharp, calculating eyes. She noticed everything: the boxes I had not yet unpacked, the furniture placement, the view from my windows into the backyard where my detached garage sat. "We have very high standards here," Corinne continued, pulling out a thick folder from her clipboard. "Property maintenance, landscaping requirements, acceptable paint colors, vehicle parking regulations. We work hard to maintain our community values and property values." I nodded politely and flipped through the documents she handed me. Most of it seemed like standard homeowner association rules, though some sections felt unusually detailed and restrictive. What struck me as odd was that several neighbors had mentioned this was a rural area with minimal HOA oversight. Corinne's folder suggested otherwise. "I noticed you have a rather large structure in your detached garage," Corinne said, her tone shifting to something more pointed. "What exactly do you keep in there?" The question caught me off guard. I had been moving boxes and furniture for days, and she had apparently been watching closely enough to notice my safe. The steel safe was large, about the size of a small refrigerator, and I had positioned it in the back corner of the garage. It was not visible from the street or from any neighboring property. Just personal storage, I replied, keeping my answer brief. Corinne's smile tightened. I see. Well, we do have regulations about commercial storage and business operations on residential properties. I would hate for there to be any violations that might require reporting to county officials. There was something in her tone that made my stomach tighten. This was not a friendly welcome. This was a threat wrapped in suburban politeness. Corinne was letting me know that she was watching, that she had noticed things she considered suspicious, and that she had the power to make my life difficult if I did not comply with her expectations. I am not running any business, I said firmly. It is just personal storage. Of course, Corinne replied, but her eyes never left mine. I am sure you understand that we all have to be careful. Neighborhood safety is our top priority. After Corinne left, I stood in my living room feeling like something had shifted. The peaceful sanctuary I thought I had found suddenly felt watched and scrutinized. I walked out to my garage and looked at my safe, wondering what Corinne thought I was hiding inside it. What I did not realize was that Corinne Morrison had just become obsessed with my safe and what she believed I was hiding inside it. That obsession would drive her to make choices that would destroy her life and teach her that some secrets are more dangerous than others. Within 2 weeks of Corinne's initial visit, I began to notice her everywhere. She would be walking her small dog past my property at different times of day, always slowing down near my driveway to peer toward the garage. When I left for work in the morning, I would see her in her front yard, watching me back out of my driveway. When I returned in the evening, her curtains would twitch as I pulled in. The first official complaint arrived in my mailbox on a Friday. It was typed on official-looking letterhead that read Meadowbrook Estates Homeowners Association and was signed by Corinne Morrison, president. The complaint cited irregular vehicle parking patterns and potential zoning violations related to oversized storage structures. I read the letter twice, trying to understand what violations she was referring to. My truck was parked in my own driveway. The storage structure was my garage, which came with the property and was clearly visible in all the real estate photos when I purchased the home. The next week brought 2 more letters. One complained about excessive noise during evening hours, on a night when I had been watching television at normal volume. The other cited suspicious activity related to frequent transportation of large containers and boxes, which was apparently Corinne's way of describing me moving my belongings into my new home. I called the county planning office to ask about the regulations Corinne kept referencing. The clerk I spoke with seemed confused by my questions. That is a rural residential area, she explained. There is a basic HOA for road maintenance and some general property guidelines, but nothing like what you are describing. Who told you about these regulations? When I mentioned Corinne Morrison and the letters I had received, there was a pause on the other end of the line. We have had several calls from that address recently, the clerk said carefully. Mrs. Morrison has filed multiple inquiries about various properties in your area. She seems very thorough in her research. That weekend, I decided to install security cameras around my property. I told myself it was just for general safety, but the truth was that Corinne's behavior was making me paranoid. I mounted cameras at the corners of my house and one overlooking the garage area. The footage from the first week was eye-opening. Corinne was not just casually walking past my property. She was conducting systematic surveillance. The cameras captured her taking photos of my garage from multiple angles. She measured distances with her steps. She peered through windows when she thought no one was watching. But the most disturbing footage came from a Tuesday afternoon when I was at work. Corinne appeared on my property with two other people I recognized from neighborhood meetings. They spent nearly an hour examining my garage, testing the door locks, and walking around the entire structure. One of them even climbed on a ladder to look through the high windows. When I confronted Corinne about the trespassing, she acted like I was the one being unreasonable. "We were conducting a routine compliance inspection," she said, standing in my driveway with her clipboard held like a shield. "As HOA president, I have the authority to ensure all properties meet community standards." "You do not have the authority to trespass on my property," I replied, trying to keep my voice calm. "I think you will find that the HOA covenants give us broad inspection rights," Corinne shot back, "especially when there are concerns about potential violations." "What violations? I have not violated anything." Corinne's expression hardened. "That remains to be determined. I suggest you review the community guidelines more carefully, and I suggest you consider whether that storage situation in your garage is really appropriate for a residential neighborhood." She was back to talking about my safe. Everything kept coming back to my safe. The harassment escalated over the following weeks. Corinne filed noise complaints about my air conditioning unit. She reported my landscaping as non-compliant with community standards, even though it was identical to most other properties in the area. She began following me when I drove to town, staying a few cars behind but always visible in my rearview mirror. The breaking point came on a Thursday evening when I caught her attempting to measure my garage windows from the outside. She was pressed against the glass with a tape measure, trying to get dimensions of the interior space. When I confronted her, she did not even try to deny what she was doing. "I need to document the size of whatever you are storing in there," she said matter-of-factly, "for the compliance report." "Get off my property," I said, my patience finally exhausted. "I will call the authorities if you continue to obstruct legitimate HOA business," Corinne replied, but she backed away from the garage. As I watched her walk back to her car, I realized that Corinne Morrison had crossed the line from annoying neighbor to genuine threat. She was no longer just curious about my safe. She was planning something. What I did not know was that Corinne had already made her decision. She was going to find out what was in my safe, no matter what it took. The security alert hit my phone like a lightning bolt during the most boring budget meeting of my career. I was half listening to quarterly projections when my phone buzzed with the notification that would change everything. "Motion detected in garage. Live feed available." My heart stopped as I opened the security app. There on my phone screen, I could see two figures moving around inside my garage. One was definitely Corinne Morrison. The other was a man I recognized as Tom Bradley, another HOA member who lived 3 streets over. They were not just snooping around this time. They had brought tools. Corinne was kneeling next to my steel safe with what looked like a crowbar in her hands. Tom was holding a pair of heavy-duty bolt cutters. On the floor beside them, I could see additional equipment: a small power drill, a hammer, a toolbox full of what appeared to be lock-picking devices. I watched in shock as Corinne positioned the crowbar against the safe's door mechanism and began applying pressure. Tom was examining the hinges with the bolt cutters, trying to find a weakness in the steel construction. They were not being careful or quiet. They were attacking my safe with the determination of people who believed they had every right to be there. My hands shook as I grabbed my car keys and ran from the conference room. I mumbled something about a family emergency to my confused colleagues and sprinted to the parking lot. While driving, I called 911 with my phone on speaker. 911, what is your emergency? I have intruders in my garage. They are trying to break into my safe. I can see them on my security cameras right now. Are you at the location, sir? No, I am driving there now, but I can see them live on my security app. They have crowbars and bolt cutters. We are dispatching officers to your address. Do not confront the intruders when you arrive. I pushed my truck faster than I should have on the rural roads leading to my property. Every few seconds, I glanced at my phone to check the security feed. Karen and Tom were still there, still working on my safe. Karen had switched to the power drill and was attempting to destroy the lock mechanism. Metal shavings were scattered around the safe's base. The 20-minute drive felt like hours. When I finally turned into my driveway, I could see that my garage door was standing wide open, but Karen and Tom were gone. The garage looked like a crime scene. Tools were scattered across the floor. My safe showed obvious damage. Deep scratches covered the door where they had tried to pry it open. The lock mechanism was partially destroyed from the drill. The police arrived 15 minutes after I got home. Two officers took my statement and examined the damage, but their attitude was frustrating. They treated the incident like a neighborhood dispute rather than a serious crime. You say this woman is your HOA president? One officer asked, scribbling notes on a small pad. She claims to be, but I have never seen any official documentation of her authority. And you think she was trying to break into your safe? I do not think it. I watched her do it. I have video footage. The officers reviewed some of the security footage on my phone, but they seemed skeptical about the severity of the situation. When I mentioned that Karen had been harassing me for months, they exchanged glances that suggested they thought this was a civil matter rather than a criminal one. We will file a report, the first officer said. You should consider getting a restraining order if the harassment continues. After the police left, I sat in my garage staring at the damage to my safe. The steel door was scarred but intact. The lock was damaged but still functional. Karen and Tom had failed to get inside, but they had come closer than I was comfortable with. I spent the evening reviewing all the security footage from the past few weeks. What I discovered made my blood run cold. Karen had not just decided to break into my safe on impulse. She had been planning this for weeks. The cameras showed Karen conducting reconnaissance missions at different times of day, learning my work schedule down to the minute. She had timed my commute, noted when I typically left and returned, and identified the longest periods when my property would be unoccupied. Tom Bradley had visited my property twice in the past month, always with Karen, always examining my garage from different angles. They had been planning this break-in methodically, treating it like a legitimate operation rather than a crime. But what disturbed me most was Karen's behavior on the camera footage. She moved around my property like she owned it. She examined my safe like she had every right to know what was inside it. She was not acting like someone who was doing something wrong. She was acting like someone who believed she was entitled to violate my privacy and steal my property. Karen Morrison had crossed the line from harassment to burglary, but she had no idea that her obsession with my safe was about to destroy her life completely. 3 days after the first break-in attempt, Karen Morrison made the decision that would ruin her life forever. I was at work on a Friday afternoon when my security system sent another alert. This time, Karen was alone. The camera footage showed her approaching my garage with a different set of tools. She had clearly done research after her first failed attempt. Instead of crowbars and bolt cutters, She carried a small duffel bag that contained professional lock-picking equipment. She had a portable drill with specialized bits designed for safe mechanisms. She even wore gloves this time. Corinne looked confident as she set up her equipment around my safe. She had obviously watched YouTube videos or consulted with someone who knew about safe cracking. Her movements were methodical and patient. She was not going to give up and run away like last time. I called the police again, but the same frustrating conversation played out. They would send someone when available, but it would take time to get an officer to my rural location. I watched helplessly through my phone as Corinne worked on my safe for over an hour. The portable drill proved more effective than her previous tools. Corinne focused on the area around the lock mechanism, methodically weakening the steel until she could insert her lock-picking tools. She was sweating and clearly frustrated, but she refused to give up. At 3:47 p.m., I watched Corinne Morrison successfully open my safe. The security camera captured the moment perfectly. Corinne's face lit up with triumph as the heavy steel door swung open. She had finally conquered the mystery that had consumed her for months. She was about to discover what her neighbor had been hiding in his garage. Then her expression changed. Corinne's triumphant smile faded as she leaned forward to examine the contents of my safe. Her face went from satisfied to confused to absolutely horrified in the span of about 10 seconds. She stumbled backward as if she had been physically struck. Inside my safe were not the personal valuables or cash or illegal items that Corinne had imagined. Instead, she was looking at neatly organized FBI case files, evidence bags with federal tags, and classified documents related to an ongoing federal investigation. She was looking at the work materials of a federal agent. Corinne's hands flew to her mouth as the reality of her situation hit her. She had not just broken into a neighbor's safe. She had compromised classified federal materials. She had committed a felony against the United States government. The security footage showed Corinne frantically trying to close the safe and flee, but her panic made her clumsy. She knocked over several evidence bags, spilling their contents across the garage floor. Classified documents scattered like leaves in the wind. Case files that had taken months to organize were suddenly spread across concrete stained with motor oil. Corinne dropped to her knees and began frantically trying to collect everything she had disturbed. But the more she tried to clean up her mess, the worse it became. She grabbed papers without looking at them, shoving classified documents into evidence bags where they did not belong. She was destroying the organization of an active federal investigation. In her panic, Corinne made her situation infinitely worse. Instead of leaving empty-handed, she fled my garage with several FBI documents still clutched in her hands. The security camera clearly showed her running to her car with federal property in her possession. Corinne Morrison had just committed theft of government property, a federal felony that carried serious prison time. But she was too panicked to realize that by taking those documents, she had transformed herself from a local burglar into a federal criminal. I sat in my office watching the security footage with a mixture of rage and dark satisfaction. Corinne's obsession with my safe had finally been satisfied, but the knowledge she had gained was going to destroy her. She had spent months harassing me about my mysterious storage, and now she knew exactly what I had been storing. What Corinne did not know was that every FBI agent has protocols for situations like this. When classified materials are compromised, the response is swift and overwhelming. The Bureau does not treat theft of federal property as a neighborhood dispute or a civil matter. Corinne Morrison was about to learn that some secrets are protected by the full power of the federal government. And when you steal from the FBI, they do not send local police officers to take a report and suggest mediation. They send federal agents with handcuffs and arrest warrants. I made the phone call that would change everything at exactly 4:15 p.m. on a Friday afternoon. My hands were steady as I dialed my field supervisor's direct number, but my heart was pounding. "Agent Richardson, this is Agent Collins. We have a situation. Classified materials have been compromised." The response was immediate and intense. Within 2 hours, my quiet rural property looked like something from a crime thriller. Black SUVs lined my driveway. Federal agents in suits swarmed across my 5 acres like an army of investigators. Mobile command units appeared seemingly from nowhere. Special Agent Sarah Martinez, the lead investigator, arrived in the first wave of agents. She was a 20-year veteran with the kind of sharp intelligence that made criminals confess before they meant to. She examined my damaged safe, while forensic specialists photographed every inch of my garage. "Walk me through exactly what happened," Agent Martinez said, reviewing the security footage on a tablet. "Start from the beginning." I explained Corinne's months of harassment, the escalating surveillance, the first break-in attempt, and finally the successful breach of my safe. Agent Martinez listened without interruption, taking notes and occasionally asking for clarification about timing or specific details. "Mrs. Morrison took classified documents with her when she fled?" Agent Martinez asked. "Yes. The security footage clearly shows her leaving with papers in her hands. She was panicking and grabbed whatever she could reach." Agent Martinez nodded grimly. "This is now a federal investigation into theft of government property and potential espionage. We are treating this as a national security breach until we determine otherwise." The transformation of my property into a federal crime scene was incredible to witness. Forensic specialists collected fingerprints from every surface Corinne had touched. Computer technicians analyzed my security system to ensure the footage had not been tampered with. Evidence specialists carefully documented and photographed every disturbed item in my safe. But the real shock came when Agent Martinez returned from Corinne's house with the search warrant results. "We found more than we expected," she said, spreading photographs across my kitchen table. "Mrs. Morrison has been conducting extensive surveillance on multiple properties in this area. She has detailed files on at least 12 neighbors, including photos, schedules, and personal information." The photographs showed Corinne's home office, which looked like something from a conspiracy thriller. She had created a wall-mounted map of the neighborhood with pins marking different properties. She had files organized by address, each containing photographs and handwritten notes about the residents' daily routines. "It gets worse," Agent Martinez continued. "She has been photographing government vehicles and license plates. Several of your neighbors work for federal agencies, and she has been unknowingly conducting surveillance on federal employees and their families." I stared at the photographs in disbelief. Corinne's obsession with my safe had been just the beginning. She had been treating the entire neighborhood like her personal intelligence operation, documenting the lives and activities of federal employees without realizing what she was doing. In the context of national security protocols, Mrs. Morrison's activities look like intelligence gathering, Agent Martinez explained. "She has detailed surveillance records on multiple federal employees, their vehicles, their schedules, and their property. Combined with the theft of classified materials, this creates a serious federal case." The FBI's investigation expanded rapidly. Every HOA member Corinne had spoken to was interviewed as a potential co-conspirator or security risk. Her phone records were subpoenaed. Her computer was seized and analyzed for evidence of coordination with foreign entities or domestic terrorist groups. Tom Bradley, who had helped Corinne with the first break-in attempt, was arrested at his home and charged as an accomplice. The other HOA members who had participated in Corinne's compliance inspections found themselves under federal investigation for their roles in surveilling government employees. Mrs. Morrison is facing multiple federal felonies, Agent Martinez informed me during a briefing the following week. Theft of government property, burglary, criminal trespass, and potentially charges related to espionage activities. The surveillance files we found in her home office demonstrate a pattern of intelligence gathering that triggers national security protocols. The irony was overwhelming. Corinne's determination to discover what I was hiding had led her to commit exactly the kinds of crimes that federal agents investigate. Her nosiness had accidentally created evidence of what appeared to be intelligence operations against federal employees. "What happens now?" I asked. "Mrs. Morrison will be arrested and charged in federal court. Given the national security implications, she will likely be held without bail pending trial. The U.S. Attorney's Office is preparing charges that could result in decades in federal prison." As I watched FBI agents pack up their equipment and prepare to leave my property, I felt a mixture of relief and amazement. Corinne Morrison's obsession with my safe had triggered a federal investigation that revealed the true extent of her invasive behavior. She had spent months harassing me about my secrets, and now the FBI knew all of hers. Corinne was about to learn that when you steal from the federal government, the consequences are swift, serious, and life-changing. The phone calls started at 6:23 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, 3 days after the FBI had finished processing my property as a crime scene. My phone rang insistently, showing Corinne Morrison's number on the caller ID. I let it go to voicemail. "Listen, we need to talk about this misunderstanding," Corinne's voice said on the recording. She sounded panicked and exhausted. "I think we can resolve this without involving lawyers or making things complicated. I made a mistake, but this does not have to ruin both our lives." She called 6 more times that morning. Each voicemail became increasingly desperate. "I can explain what happened. I was trying to protect the neighborhood. You have to understand, I thought you might be involved in something illegal. I was just trying to keep everyone safe." By the afternoon, Corinne had apparently decided that phone calls were not enough. I found a manila envelope in my mailbox containing the FBI documents she had stolen from my safe. Her handwritten note was attached with a paperclip. "I accidentally took these papers during my inspection of your property. I am returning them immediately to show my good faith in resolving this matter. I hope we can work together to clear up this misunderstanding." I called Agent Martinez immediately. She arrived within an hour to collect the documents, wearing latex gloves and treating them as evidence in a federal crime. "Mrs. Morrison is making her situation worse with every action she takes," Agent Martinez explained as she carefully bagged the returned documents. "Attempting to tamper with evidence and obstruct a federal investigation are additional felonies. Her lawyer should have told her to stop all contact with witnesses and evidence." But Corinne was not done. Over the next week, she embarked on a campaign of damage control that demonstrated her complete misunderstanding of how federal law enforcement works. She contacted every HOA member who had participated in her surveillance activities, trying to coordinate their stories and convince them to back up her claims about legitimate property inspections. The FBI was monitoring all of these communications. Tom Bradley, who was already facing federal charges for his role in the break-in, received multiple calls from Corinne trying to convince him to claim that they had been conducting official HOA business rather than attempting burglary. "We were doing compliance checks," Corinne insisted during one recorded phone call. "That is a legitimate HOA function. We have the authority to inspect properties for violations." Tom's response was not what Corinne wanted to hear. "Corinne, we broke into his safe with power tools. There is no HOA rule that gives us the right to drill open someone's personal safe." Corinne's attempts to manipulate the narrative extended beyond the HOA members. She filed a formal complaint with the county planning office, claiming that I had been operating an illegal business from my residential property without proper permits. She argued that storing federal case files in a home garage violated zoning regulations. The county clerk who received Corinne's complaint immediately forwarded it to the FBI as potential evidence of continued obstruction of justice. Corinne's most desperate move came when she hired an expensive criminal defense attorney. Richard Hawthorne was a well-known defense lawyer who specialized in white-collar federal crimes. His first meeting with Corinne apparently did not go well. "Mrs. Morrison has been advised to cease all contact with witnesses, evidence, and anyone connected to this case," Hawthorne told reporters outside the courthouse. "She has been instructed to make no further statements about these matters." But Corinne could not help herself. Even with a high-priced lawyer telling her to stay quiet, she continued making phone calls and sending letters. She reached out to local news reporters, trying to frame the story as federal overreach and government persecution of ordinary citizens. "They are treating me like a terrorist because I was concerned about neighborhood safety," Corinne told a local TV reporter. "All I did was try to find out what my neighbor was hiding in his garage. Now they want to put me in federal prison." Agent Martinez called me after Corinne's television interview aired. "Mrs. Morrison just created more evidence for our case. Every public statement she makes demonstrates her intent to steal classified materials and obstruct our investigation." Corinne Morrison was spiraling out of control, and every action she took to save herself was actually ensuring her conviction. She had crossed the point where damage control was possible, but she was too panicked and too proud to accept that reality. Her expensive lawyer's advice was sound, but Corinne's personality would not let her follow it. She was about to learn that federal prosecutors do not negotiate with people who continue committing crimes while under investigation. The end came at dawn on a cold Thursday morning in November. I was drinking coffee and reading the news when the sound of vehicles pulling into the neighborhood broke the quiet rural silence. Through my kitchen window, I could see a convoy of black SUVs and unmarked cars surrounding Corinne Morrison's house. Federal agents in tactical gear approached her front door while other agents secured the perimeter of her property. The arrest was swift and professional. Corinne was led from her house in handcuffs, wearing a bathrobe and looking completely defeated. Several neighbors stood in their driveways watching the woman who had appointed herself their leader being taken away as a federal criminal. The local news coverage was immediate and devastating for Corinne's reputation. "Local HOA president arrested for theft of FBI documents," read the headline on the evening news. The story included security footage of Corinne breaking into my safe, her mugshot, and interviews with neighbors who described months of her invasive behavior. "She was always taking pictures and asking questions about everyone's business," one neighbor told the reporter. "We thought she was just being nosy, but apparently she was creating some kind of surveillance files on all of us. The legal proceedings moved quickly through the federal court system. Corinne's expensive lawyer convinced her to accept a plea deal rather than face trial on the full range of charges. She pleaded guilty to theft of government property, burglary, criminal trespass, and obstruction of justice. The federal judge who sentenced Corinne did not show much sympathy for her situation. "Mrs. Morrison, your actions represent a serious breach of national security protocols and a violation of your neighbor's privacy and safety," Judge Patricia Williams stated during the sentencing hearing. "Your obsessive surveillance of federal employees and theft of classified materials cannot be excused as neighborhood concern." Corinne received a sentence of 4 years in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised probation. She was also ordered to pay substantial fines and restitution costs that forced her to sell her house to cover the legal expenses. The ripple effects of Corinne's downfall extended throughout the neighborhood. The Meadowbrook Estates HOA officially dissolved after the scandal, with most members wanting nothing to do with an organization that had produced a federal criminal. The elaborate neighborhood rules and regulations that Corinne had enforced turned out to be mostly fictional, created by her to justify her invasive behavior. Tom Bradley, who had participated in the first break-in attempt, received a lighter sentence of 18 months in federal prison after cooperating with investigators. The other HOA members who had participated in Corinne's surveillance activities faced no criminal charges but were thoroughly investigated and cleared by federal security officials. For me, Corinne's arrest finally brought the peace and privacy I had moved to the ranch to find. My new neighbors were respectful people who understood the value of minding their own business. The security cameras I had installed during Corinne's harassment campaign were eventually removed, no longer necessary in a neighborhood where people respected boundaries. Corinne's case became something of a cautionary tale in law enforcement circles, shared as an example of how civilian surveillance can accidentally intersect with national security investigations. Her story spread on social media as a warning about the dangers of HOA overreach and the importance of respecting privacy. 6 months after Corinne's sentencing, I received a letter from her federal prison facility. She wanted to apologize and explain her actions, still trying to justify her behavior even from behind bars. I threw the letter away without reading past the first paragraph. Corinne Morrison had finally learned what was in my safe, but the knowledge had cost her everything. Her obsession with my secrets had revealed all of hers, and the consequences would follow her for the rest of her life. Sometimes the best revenge is simply letting someone destroy themselves through their own actions.